The alien girl shrieked, her cry of pain echoing through the busy spaceport, as a male Nasat slammed his pincer into her gut, knocking her to the ground. Stephen Harris, the only human on planet Xyloth, had a split second to decide: ignore the abuse or risk everything to save her. Stephen stepped off the transport shuttle into the bustling alien spaceport, crystalline spires towering overhead. Not a single human in sight. His hand brushed the tender skin behind his ear, feeling the translation implant. Only 2 days since the surgery. He was alone here, truly alone, cut off from his species, everything familiar. He collected his single piece of luggage, anxiety rising in his throat. But this was for humanity. They were counting on him. He had to succeed, or the Kraith would destroy Earth. Stephen walked through the crowded terminal, quantum mechanics textbooks heavy in his bag. Then he saw her, a Nasat girl, maybe 20 in human years, being attacked. 3 huge males surrounded her, jabbing her violently, snarling insults. She collapsed, her belongings scattering across the floor. Dozens of aliens strode by. Not one stopped to help her. They didn't even look. Stephen took a step forward, fists clenched. He had to get involved. Humanity needed him focused on his studies, not alien affairs. He could lose his place at the academy. But then the lead aggressor grabbed the girl by the throat, lifting her like a rag doll. She clawed desperately at his gripping pincer, legs flailing, gasping for air. Stephen couldn't just watch. He shouted, running at them full tilt. Get off her! Maybe he couldn't save humanity today, but he could save one innocent life, even if it cost him everything. The 3 Nasats whirled around to face Stephen, mandibles clicking menacingly and compound eyes narrowing. The leader of the group released his grip on Umbra's throat, letting her collapse to the spaceport floor in a coughing heap. He took a threatening step toward Stephen, looming over the human. "Move along, human," the Nasat sneered, voice dripping with contempt. "This doesn't concern you." Stephen ignored the command, hurrying over to Umbra's side. He crouched down next to her, helping the shaking girl to her feet. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, as he quickly gathered up her scattered belongings from the ground. Umbra nodded hesitantly, her eyes wide with shock and fear. The Nasat leader moved to stand directly in front of them, his shadow falling across Stephen. "I won't warn you again, human. Walk away." Stephen straightened up, looking the much larger alien straight in his multifaceted eyes. His heart pounded, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "No, she's coming with me." The Nasat made a harsh guttural clicking noise deep in his throat, a clear sign of barely restrained rage. "You don't get to interfere in Nasat business, human." Stephen was acutely aware that he was putting everything at risk. His place at the prestigious academy, and with it, humanity's chance to learn the advanced Nasat quantum mechanics that could be their only defense against the Kraith. But he couldn't just stand by and let an innocent person be brutalized. He squared his shoulders, looking up at the seething Nasat. "Well, I just did." Grabbing his luggage in one hand and gently taking Umbra's arm with the other, Stephen steered them quickly away, pushing through the bustling spaceport crowds. He didn't dare look back to see if they were being pursued. After a few minutes of frantic dodging through the throngs of aliens, Stephen finally slowed his pace. Umbra glanced over at him, her voice still shaky. Thank you for helping me back there." Stephen waved off her gratitude, suddenly feeling a surge of anxiety as the gravity of what he'd just done began to sink in. He'd assaulted a Nasat, interfered in their business. What would the repercussions be? Arriving at the gleaming Quantum Mechanics Academy, Stephen checked in and received his room assignment. But when he opened the door to his dormitory, his heart sank. Sitting on one of the beds, scowling at him with undisguised malice, was Xyloth, one of the Nasats who had been attacking Umbra. Well, if it isn't the meddling human," Xyloth spat, standing up. "You just made a big mistake, kid. You want to make enemies with the Nasats? I'll give you enemies." Before Stephen could respond, there was a knock at the door. An academy official entered, his face grave. "Mr. Harris, a word, please." Out in the hallway, the official turned to Stephen with a somber expression. It seems there was an altercation at the spaceport. Several witnesses reported a human matching your description interfering in an internal NASAT affair, striking a NASAT citizen. Stephen opened his mouth to defend himself, but the official held up a silencing hand. I don't need to hear your side. The NASAT delegation has already filed a formal complaint. Given your people's position here, we have no choice but to place you on immediate academic probation. Any further infractions, and you'll be expelled and deported back to your planet. Do I make myself clear? Stephen nodded numbly, a cold dread settling into his stomach. He'd come here to save humanity. But had his impulsive actions just doomed them all? Stephen slumped back to his dormitory after the meeting with the academy official, mind racing. He paced the small room, barely resisting the urge to slam his fist into the wall. Xyloth watched him with a smug, satisfied expression. Not so easy being the hero, is it, human? Xyloth sneered. You should have minded your own business. Stephen whirled to face his hostile roommate. She needed help, I couldn't just ignore it. So you could have, you should have. Now you'll pay the price for your meddling. Stephen opened his mouth to retort, but thought better of it. Engaging with Xyloth would only make things worse. He had to focus on his studies, on learning the NASAT quantum mechanics that could save his planet from the Kraith. Over the following weeks, Stephen threw himself into his coursework with singular determination. He spent every spare moment in the lab, poring over quantum entanglement theory, running simulations late into the night. But at every turn, he found himself stymied by subtle sabotage. His lab reports would go missing, only to reappear hours later with crucial data erased. Equipment he needed would be mysteriously misplaced or broken. And always Xyloth and his cohorts would be there, watching from the shadows with malicious grins. Despite the constant hindrance, Stephen made slow, painstaking progress. Then, late one night, hunched over a glowing holographic model, a flash of inspiration struck him. His fingers flew over the console, adjusting parameters, rewriting code. The model shimmered, reformed. A stable quantum entanglement bridge, the theoretical holy grail that had eluded NASAT scientists for decades. Heart pounding with excitement, Stephen saved his work and raced through the darkened academy halls to his professor's office. But when he returned to the lab, his joy turned to ashes. The room had been ransacked. Consoles smashed, notes shredded, holographic displays flickering and stuttering, and there, in the midst of the destruction, stood Xyloth. Looks like you'll have to start over, human, he said with a vicious smile. Stephen sank to his knees among the wreckage of his work, despair washing over him. How could he possibly complete the program in the face of such unrelenting opposition? The next day, Stephen sat in the academy gardens, head in his hands. A gentle touch on his shoulder startled him. It was Umbra. Stephen, I wanted to thank you again for helping me, she said softly, and to apologize. I heard about your probation. It's my fault you're in this mess. Stephen shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. I couldn't stand by and let them hurt you. Umbra hesitated, then sat beside him. I'm in the quantum mechanics program too. I've seen how Xyloth and the others have been sabotaging your work. Let me help you recreate it. Stephen stared at her, a glimmer of hope kindling in his chest. Together they snuck into the lab night after night, working to reconstruct Stephen's breakthrough. As they worked, they shared stories of their lives, their worlds. Stephen spoke of Earth's green hills and blue oceans. Umbra described the towering crystal spires of her home city. A bond formed between them, human and alien, united in purpose. With Umbra's brilliance and Stephen's innovative human perspective, they not only recreated his quantum entanglement bridge, but improved upon it, developing the first practical model for an entanglement communication device. Elated, they presented their work to the Academy board. But as the hologram of their device rotated slowly above the table, Stephen's blood ran cold. Xyloth and his gang stood before the board, triumphant grins on their insectoid faces. As you can see, Xyloth said smugly, We have developed the first stable quantum communication system. It is our work that will revolutionize the field." "That's a lie," Stephen shouted. "Umbra and I created that model." The board members looked at each other uncertainly. The head Nasat turned a disapproving glare on Stephen and Umbra. "A human and a Nasat female, claiming to have made this breakthrough, when 3 upstanding Nasat males have already presented it as their own? The only logical conclusion is that you stole this work from Xyloth and his associates." "We'll be generously dropping the theft charges," Xyloth said magnanimously, "but of course they must be expelled immediately for their academic dishonesty." Stephen stood in stunned silence, his mind reeling, as the board moved to expel him and Umbra on the spot. This couldn't be happening. As the vote was called, he lunged across the table at Xyloth with an inarticulate cry of rage. The Nasat moved with shocking speed, striking Umbra with a vicious blow that sent her crumpling to the floor. "Umbra!" Stephen shouted, dropping to cradle her limp form. Purple blood leaked from her antenna as she lay unmoving in his arms. Campus security swarmed in, dragging Stephen away from her prone body as he struggled and screamed. The medics rushed Umbra to the emergency room as a dazed Stephen was escorted from the building in restraints. Stephen sat in the cramped holding cell, head in his hands. The cold metal bench dug into his legs as he replayed the disastrous scene in the academy boardroom over and over in his mind. Umbra crumpled on the floor, purple blood pooling around her head. The look of smug triumph on Xyloth's face, campus security dragging him away in restraints as he screamed Umbra's name. How had it all gone so wrong? They had created something extraordinary, something that could change the galaxy. And now, because of Xyloth's lies and sabotage, it would be credited to those despicable Nasats. Stephen would be expelled, deported in disgrace back to Earth. And Umbra, he didn't even know if she was alive. Despair threatened to swallow him whole. He had failed. Failed Umbra, failed himself, failed humanity. Earth's last hope against the Kraith, extinguished. A sudden commotion outside his cell jolted Stephen from his spiraling thoughts. Raised voices, the hiss of an opening door. Stephen looked up as the cell barrier slid aside to reveal the stoic face of an Academy security officer. "On your feet, human. The board has ordered your release." "What? Why?" Stephen asked, hardly daring to hope as he stood on shaky legs. The guard's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. "You've got some loyal friends, kid. Now move." Heart pounding, Stephen followed the guard through the white, winding halls of the Academy Detention Center. As they emerged into the bright sunlight of the quad, a small figure detached itself from a nearby bench and sprinted towards them. "Stephen!" Umbra cried, throwing her arms around him. He returned the embrace fiercely, hardly believing she was real. The guard discreetly stepped back. "I thought I'd lost you," Stephen murmured into her silky hair. She pulled back, meeting his gaze with shining eyes. "You saved me again, Stephen. It was my turn to save you." "What do you mean? What happened?" "I told the truth. I went to the board and showed them the proof that Xyloth stole our work, that he's been sabotaging you from the start. They revoked your expulsion. Xyloth and his friends are the ones being expelled now." Stephen shook his head in wonderment, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Umbra, you're incredible, thank you." She reached for his hand, twining her fingers through his. "We did this together, Stephen. We'll face whatever comes next together, too." Over the following days, it seemed like the whole galaxy had heard their story. Nasat media lauded them as scientific heroes, the unlikely partnership that had achieved the impossible. The Academy held a grand ceremony in their honor, and Stephen became the first human ever awarded the coveted Xyloth Scientific Merit Prize. As he stood at the podium in front of the assembled dignitaries, Stephen sought out Umbra in the crowd. She beamed up at him. "I accept this honor not just for myself, but for all those who dare to reach across the divide between species," Stephen said, voice ringing clear. "My friendship with Umbra has taught me that only by embracing our differences can we achieve true greatness. Let our partnership be an example to the galaxy." The assembled Nasat and alien representatives applauded, but the celebratory mood was abruptly shattered by a strident alarm. Worried murmurs rippled through the crowd as a harried-looking official rushed to the podium and spoke urgently to Stephen. Stephen felt the blood drain from his face as he listened. Grasping the podium for support, he turned back to the audience, voice grim. "I've just received word that the Kraith hegemony has launched an attack on the human colony of New Horizon. They used a weapon powered by quantum entanglement, the same principles behind the device Umbra and I invented." Horrified gasps echoed through the auditorium. Stephen sought Umbra's eyes, seeing his own shock and dismay mirrored there. "Xyloth," Stephen said numbly. "He must have sent our research to the Kraith before he was caught." The room erupted into chaos, dignitaries shouting over each other about military retaliation and planetary defense. Stephen barely heard them. He stepped down from the podium in a daze, making his way to Umbra's side. Her small hand gripped his like a lifeline. Together they stood, an island of stillness amid the uproar as the terrible realization sank in. The breakthrough they had hoped would unite the galaxy might instead have given the Kraith the key to destroying it. The key that Stephen himself had handed them. In the wake of the devastating Kraith attack, the Nasat High Council convened an emergency session. After hours of heated debate, they reached a decision. They would share Stephen and Umbra's groundbreaking quantum entanglement technology with Earth. It was their only hope of leveling the playing field against the Kraith hegemony. Stephen received his orders via a terse video message. He was to return to Earth immediately and assist the Earth Defense Force in integrating the new technology into their communication and weapon systems. Umbra requested to accompany him, both to lend her scientific expertise and to serve as a liaison for Nasat interests. Their journey back to Earth was tense and quiet, the weight of their task hanging heavy between them. Stephen stared out the viewport at the swirling hyperspace vortex, Umbra's hand clasped tightly in his. When they arrived at the Earth Defense Force's headquarters, they were greeted not with gratitude, but with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. As they were escorted to the lab under armed guard, Stephen exchanged an uneasy glance with Umbra. This did not bode well. His fears were confirmed as soon as they reviewed the project files. The Earth Defense Force scientists had taken their quantum communication prototype and weaponized it, creating designs for a device capable of destroying entire planets. Stephen was horrified. He burst into the project lead's office, Umbra close on his heels. "You can't do this," Stephen insisted, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. This technology was meant to bring people together, not to create weapons of mass destruction. The project lead, a stern-faced woman in a crisp military uniform, regarded him coldly. "You're in no position to tell us what we can and cannot do, Mr. Harris. This is a matter of Earth security." "But using the device like this goes against everything we stand for," Umbra interjected, her usually soft voice filled with conviction. "It will only lead to more destruction, more loss of innocent life." "Which is why we need it to protect ourselves," the project lead retorted. "The Kraith have already proven they have no compunctions about attacking civilian targets. We must be prepared to respond in kind." The argument grew more heated, voices rising until Stephen was shouting, "I won't let you pervert our work like this. I'll go to the media, the international courts, anyone who will listen." The project lead's eyes narrowed. She tapped a command into her console, and armed security personnel flooded into the room. "Stephen Harris, Umbra of Xyloth, you are hereby placed under arrest for obstructing a critical Earth Defense Force operation. You will be detained until the project is complete." Stephen and Umbra soon found themselves confined to a small Spartan room deep within the Earth Defense Force compound, with no contact with the outside world. Days bled together as they paced the narrow confines of their shared cell, racking their brains for a solution, a way to stop this perversion of their life's work. Late one night, Stephen was startled awake by a piercing alarm and flashing red lights. He leapt to his feet as Umbra bolted upright on her cot, eyes wide. "A perimeter breach in the restricted lab section," a robotic voice announced over the intercom. All personnel report to your stations. With a sinking feeling, Stephen met Umbra's panicked gaze. The quantum device lab, he breathed. You don't think... But Umbra was already moving, her slim fingers making quick work of the electronic lock on their door. It clicked open, and she slipped out into the chaos of the corridor, Stephen hurrying to follow. They raced through the labyrinthine halls of the compound, dodging scrambling soldiers and security patrols. Stephen's heart pounded, dread rising in his throat with each step. He knew, deep in his bones, that Umbra was right. They couldn't allow this doomsday weapon to be completed, no matter the cost. As they skidded into the lab, Stephen's worst fears were confirmed. The quantum device prototype pulsed with an angry red light, energy levels spiking on the nearby monitors. And there, at the control panel, stood Umbra. "I'm sorry, Stephen," she said, tears glimmering in her compound eyes as her fingers flew over the console. "But I can't let our creation become an instrument of genocide. I have to destroy it." "Umbra, no!" Stephen lunged forward, grasping her wrists. "There has to be another way. Please, don't do this." She met his gaze, her expression anguished but resolute. "It's too late. The self-destruct sequence is already initiated. You need to get out of here. Warn the others." The device let out an ominous hum, the energy readings on the monitors redlining. Stephen pulled Umbra into a desperate embrace, shielding her slight form with his body. He squeezed his eyes shut. The world went white. A roaring wave of heat and force slammed into Stephen, flinging him across the lab like a rag doll. He felt Umbra torn from his arms an instant before he crashed into a bank of equipment, pain exploding through his body. Then merciful darkness. Stephen swam up from the depths of unconsciousness to the wail of sirens and the acrid scent of smoke. He blinked, trying to focus through the ringing in his ears and the stabbing pain in his head. The lab was gone, reduced to a twisted hellscape of smouldering rubble and flickering flames. "Umbra," he croaked, struggling to sit up. "Umbra." There, a slender blue hand poking out from beneath a slab of broken concrete. Stephen staggered to his feet, heedless of his own injuries, and limped to her side. With a surge of desperate strength, he heaved the jagged chunk of debris off her. Umbra lay there, her exoskeleton cracked, purple blood oozing from a dozen wounds. But the slight rise and fall of her chest sent a thrill of relief through Stephen. She was alive. As the sound of running feet and shouting voices approached, Stephen gathered Umbra into his arms, cradling her broken form against his chest. The horrible weapon was destroyed. But at what cost? In the aftermath of the disastrous explosion, the full extent of the Earth Defense Force's reckless plans came to light. The revelation sent shockwaves through the government and military, leading to a full congressional inquiry and a purge of the hawkish leadership who had authorized the weaponization project. From his hospital bed, Stephen watched the news feeds in a haze of pain medication and exhaustion. A new global initiative was being formed, one dedicated to using the quantum entanglement technology solely for peaceful applications. Scientific research, communication, medical advances. Never again would it be twisted into a tool of destruction. And he and Umbra, the unlikely pair who had sacrificed everything to prevent that unthinkable outcome, were being hailed as heroes. The footage of them being pulled from the wreckage, bloodied and broken but alive, played on every channel. Stephen turned his head as Umbra stirred in the bed beside his, her eyes fluttering open. He reached out, clasping her hand in his. "We did it," he murmured. "We stopped them." She squeezed his fingers weakly, a faint smile touching her mandibles. "Yes, but the fight is just beginning. We have to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Stephen nodded, resolve hardening in his chest. It would be a long and difficult road, but with Umbra by his side he knew they could face anything. For the first time, the future of human-Nasat relations looked bright. Even so, as he drifted off to a healing sleep, the memory of that blinding flash and searing heat haunted him. They had come within a hair's breadth of enabling the destruction of worlds, and Stephen knew that knowledge would forever weigh heavy on his soul. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.